Hello, Right Hive Conference. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host for this panel, Nicholas W. Fuller. I'm a writer, I'm a gamer, and I'm honored to be moderating the panel publishing short stories as part of Right Hive 2023. I'm joined today by three extraordinary writers of short fiction and other forms. So let's get right into introductions. Lara Ameen is a screenwriter, novelist, short fiction writer, sensitivity, authenticity reader, and PhD candidate in education with a disability studies emphasis at Chapman University. Wow. She's received an MFA in screenwriting from California State University, Northridge, and her scripts have placed in Screencraft's sci-fi and fantasy screenwriting competition, Launchpad TV pilot competition, Austin Film Festival screenplay competition, and others. Her YA contemporary fantasy novel, Spare, I should have asked you this one ahead of time. Spare, all right. Was awarded a disabled writer's grant from Suffering the Silence, long-listed in Voyage YA's first chapters contest and their book pitch contest. A Lambda Literary Screenwriting Fellow, Mentorship Matters TV Writing Program finalist, and an NBC Launch TV Writing Program finalist. Her short fiction has been published in Prismatica Magazine, Disabled Voices Anthology, Flash Fiction Magazine, Drunk Monkeys, gotta love that name, Just Femme and Dandy, and elsewhere. She makes her traditional public debut as contributing to the young adult multi-genre anthology Being Ace, forthcoming from Page Street on October 10th, 2023. Lara, that's already an impressive bio, and congratulations on the upcoming Trad Pub debut.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this panel. This is really cool.
Absolutely. No, I love doing these, and thank you to Right High for setting this up. But Chyina Powell is an editor and Christian author. She is the founder of Powell Editorial, which is where she offers services from developmental editing and sensitivity reading to beta reading and publishing consultations. She is also the founder of Women of Color Writers Circle, a safe space and community to offer encouragement and resources to women who write. When she's not working, you can find her writing, reading speculative fiction, being active in her church, or drinking way too much tea. Chyina is a little off topic, but first, hello, and second, what's your favorite kind of tea? As a tea enthusiast myself.
Matcha is my favorite kind of tea.
Oh. Very good. Can't go wrong. All right. Lauren Davila. Lauren T. Davila is a Pushcart nominated Latina author, anthologist, and editor. She has edited multiple short story anthologies, including Where Monsters Lurk and Magic Hides, Places We Build in the Universe, and the upcoming Locale, an anthology of time and place. Her own poetry and short fiction has appeared online at Granada Magazine, The Paragon Journal, Headcanon Magazine, and more. She is currently editing her debut novel, At the Still Point, an adult Gothic mystery featuring ballerinas and the Greek Furies, as well as pursuing her PhD in English at Claremont Graduate University. So clearly, Lauren, you have a lot of free time. There's nothing going on. Super
Just
chill.
so much
Right.
free time.
She holds an MFA in fiction writing from George Mason University. Besides her creative and academic work, she is the acquisitions editor at Inked and Gray Press and is actively acquiring genre fiction, which is cool. My ears picked up. She lives in the greater Los Angeles area where you can find her swimming, walking her golden retriever, and drinking one too many rose lattes. She is also a judge at NYC Midnight and editor-in-chief for Foothill Poetry Journal. Lauren, thank you for being here. Can you quickly, briefly, tell our audience a brief explanation of what NYC Midnight is? Because I think I'm familiar with it and it's super unique and cool.
Yeah, so they run a bunch of different, it's normally flash fiction contests, and it's like every few months, and it's sort of like they'll give a prompt and everybody will write for it. And it's really, really interesting. We get some amazing submissions.
Right. And the way it's formatted, I think like you write one story within like 5 days or something. And if you make it to the next round, you have to write the next in like 2 days. If you make it to the next round, you have to write the next in like 2 seconds, and it's crazy, right?
Yeah, on my side, it's a little bit easier as the judge. We have a little bit more time, but I know for anybody who's on the actual writing side, the deadlines are interesting to say the least.
Right. Yeah, super cool. That one's kind of on my radar. It seems fun. But well, thank you all. So glad we're able to get together and be here. Again, this panel is all about publishing short stories. So each of you has been working either as a writer or editor in the short story space. So I'm just going to jump right into it. First, Lara, I have a bit of a technical question that I want you to field first. How long are we talking? Like how many words is a short story? It seems like there's a little bit of variance depending on where you're trying to submit. Is that?
Yeah, I would say, sweet spot, I would say, flash fiction is like under 1,000 words or under 500, but I would say anywhere from like 1,000 to 1,000 to 6,000 maybe. Some people go 10,000, but for some, it depends on the submission. It depends on where you're submitting what you're submitting to, but I would say 5,000 to 6,000 is like a sweet spot, especially for genre fiction, like fantasy or something like that.
And I see nodding with Lauren and China, so I think we
Yeah.
kind of agree with that technical assessment there.
Mhm.
China?
Yeah, I think I think if you want to put like the legal definition, it's like 15,000, but no one writes 15,000 words for a short story.
Yeah.
Right? I think Writers of the Future accept 17,000 words, and that's like, boy, that's a big chunk of a novel if I wrote that many, like.
It has to be really, really, like every word has to count when you write a short story. So those words have to really mean something. So if it can be 17,000 words, but if it's 17,000 words of fluff, it's kind of not okay.
Totally agree. No, I think like short story writing is its own beast. You have to do so much in a short amount of time, which gets us to this wonderful segue to my first, real question that I'd like each of you to answer in turn. From a writer's perspective, what are the advantages and disadvantages of writing a short story? Let's start with you, China.
Oh, there are so many advantages, but also a lot of disadvantages. So I tend to write short stories. One, if I feel like what I want to write doesn't require a novel length, or if I don't want to write something super long, if I have some really cool idea and I just want to get it on paper. Another advantage is writing short stories is a great way to just get into free writing. Let's say you took a break from writing and you just need to, get your writing hat back on. Writing a short story is a great way to do that. Also, it's a great way to just see if an idea that you have would work in a novel, because some ideas, they might be really good ideas, but maybe you don't know the form yet. So writing a short story is a great way to kind of explore form. So maybe you think this can be a novel, but it turns out that it would be better in a different form, like a screenplay or something like that. So it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet. But a disadvantage would be that sometimes you write short stories and you try to fit too much into too few words. So there's a disconnect with what you're writing, and maybe you love it, but if you're trying to share it with someone else, they won't get it. So that's, I think, one of the biggest disadvantages is that that you have to say so much in so little words that you really have to mean every word you say.
Well said. Well said. All right, Lara, same question. Advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I agree with China. I think advantages are that you could explore new genres that you didn't explore. You can't necessarily explore in a novel. Like you could explore those in a novel, but you're with the novel or like a longer project for a longer amount of time. And I find that if I'm with a bigger project, like you kind of get tired of it really quickly, or you're working on it for so long that it gets tiring. And with a short story, you can explore new genres. You're probably more likely to finish it. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that don't finish short stories, or if they feel unmotivated, they might not finish it, or it might not be the right project. But if it's a shorter project, you're probably more likely to finish it versus finishing like a novel or having that commitment. So I think that could be an advantage. And writing in new genres. I would say disadvantages is that if you are like an overwriter, or you write really, really long form where you're used to writing something with a lot of words or a lot of things, and you're not used to like a shorter form, I think that could be a disadvantage for people who not necessarily overwrite, but who like to write a lot of words, or who like to write like big, fantasy epics, or who don't know how to cut things down, or whatever. But I think that can be spun to an advantage too, because learning how to be more concise and learning what the best form is for someone's work whether it's your own work or someone else's work, like looking at the form would help. And also studying, like reading short stories, like, you know, if you want to write a YA short story, read a YA anthology, or there are hundreds of short stories that are online for free that people can read. Like when I'm not, you know, writing, you know, short stories, or if I want to, you know, read, I could just go online and look up, you know, different short stories and read something. So reading the form, I would say also as an advantage, but I think the disadvantages could also turn into advantages as well.
Love that answer. I appreciate especially the idea that it makes it easier to genre hop, because I love that. But I do feel a little called out, Lara, because I definitely am sitting on like a couple short story ideas that are like being a little started, but that's okay. I know that wasn't your, all right, we'll let it slide. It's fine, you know. Lauren, advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I think as you were saying, like that's kind of the nice thing about a short story, right? You can just have these little ideas and little tidbits and just pull them out and thread them. It's not as hard as a novel, right? I know some friends who have like multiple novels they're working on, and that scope sometimes for me is just way too much. Like I tend to concentrate on one novel and then have a couple different ideas percolating for short stories. So I definitely understand. But I feel like Chyina and Lara covered it pretty well. I think the idea of genre hopping in short stories is really appealing. And I almost feel like some of the time the audience for a short story sort of reminds me of like looking at an improv class or like a comedy show where the audience is more willing to just sort of go like, okay, and sort of be along for the ride. I think some people who pick up a novel, the audience has a lot of questions, right? They're like, well, how did this happen? And where did these people come from? And what's the background of the history? And a lot of the time for short stories, you sort of have the ability to go, well, there was an apocalypse and here's what's going on. Or there's a random, like mermaids have popped up and okay. And the audience is a little bit more willing to just go along with it. It's a shorter ride. You don't have to be as involved. So I think that that's maybe an advantage in terms of where you're placing the writing in terms of the audience. So I think for me that's been interesting to be able to just sort of throw some weird things out there and see what sort of sticks. I'm trying to think of disadvantages. I don't know if there really are for me. I love short stories, so I feel like maybe disadvantages would just be like the scope. If you really are a big world builder, or you really like to have a big sort of story Bible with a lot of different things going on in it, maybe short stories wouldn't be the best medium for you, but I always think people should try it before they knock short stories. It's a different form than novels or screenwriting or other different genres, but I think there's a lot to offer there.
Nice. Love it. So each of you are kind of a little bit touched on, at least a little bit, you know, obviously a short story is like a shorter story, right? It's not as daunting of a project as like a novel. So I wonder kind of how long do each of you spend on writing a short story, and how many like rounds of revisions might you do while you're writing a short story? Let's start with Lara.
Such a good question. It depends on the story, and it depends on what it's for. Like for my traditional publishing like debut for the short story I wrote in Being Ace, I started that story in 2019, and I had pitched the idea to an author friend, and the anthology idea, it died on submission, so it didn't go through. So I had this idea, and then when this other anthology opportunity came up, I pitched it, but then I was like pitching other ideas, and I was going with this other short story, and I got notes back from both editors, and they were kind of like, this kind of doesn't work your pitch for, this other one is stronger. So I ended up going with the one that's the stronger pitch and writing this story. But I had no idea how to like, I had never really written a thriller before. It's a young adult thriller. I'd never really, so like I think it depends on the idea, and that one took a really long time for me. I went from like August to October of 2022, then I went back and they wanted me to add some more stuff recently, so like January to March of 2023. And that's just for that story. For the other stories that I've gotten published that aren't traditionally publishing, I would also say it just depends. Sometimes it takes like a few months or a year or two. For the flash fiction, I could write it in a day or two, but then, you know, submitting it is a whole other thing, so it might not be accepted at all. But I think it depends on the route that you're going with the story and what kind of story it is and how long it is too, because a 5,000-6,000 word or even up to 10,000 word short story would take much longer than like a 1,000 word story, and to put all the world building and pieces and stuff together, it just is a different like process. So that's like my roundabout answer.
Yeah. Oh, you know, I think that makes sense though. Like ultimately it depends. So, and I did see a lot of nodding from Chyina and Lauren, but you want to add to that, Chyina?
So I definitely agree. It really depends. I think the longest I spent on a short story, like the first time, like the pre-revision, when I was getting my master's degree, we had, because I was getting my master's in fiction, so we had to write a book. So I decided I was going to write a collection of short stories. That was a poor decision on my part. And so there was one story and it was really good, and I knew what I wanted it to say. I just but getting the words on paper took a very long time. So it took a couple of months just writing it, you know, to a point where I was satisfied, let alone, you know, like getting it to my like getting it approved and everything. So I could graduate, which was another stressful situation because I really wanted to graduate. But it really does depend on the story. It depends on how close you are to the story, I think, too, because I feel like as writers, when we are really invested in a story, or if it's something we really, really want to tell, we tend to work harder for it. So if it's a story that like maybe you had this idea for a really long time, and so when you're finally putting it on paper, that story might take a lot longer for you to write than a story idea that you just got, because you've been percolating the ideas, you know what you want to say, and maybe the ideas that you had when you first got it aren't really the ideas you want to use now, or so it takes a lot longer. And let alone, you know, the revision process. If you want to publish it, like if you want to do it traditional self-indie, that's a whole other thing. But as far as revisions go, I try to do 3 passes of anything I do, at least. So when I revise, I do 3 passes. I'll send it to someone. They'll give me their feedback. Then I'll do another pass. Maybe I'll send it to someone else, you know, but
Sure.
I think, yeah.
No, sorry. Sure.
No, you're fine. I think that I was just going to say that I think that it really depends on how close you are to the story and really what the idea is. I also think it takes longer if it's a genre that you're not familiar with. So
That yeah, you know, being familiar is helpful, right? Yeah, makes sense. All right, Lauren, same question. Like, what's you know, kind of the longest you've spent on a story, maybe shortest you've spent on a story?
Yeah, I think everybody has kind of chatted about it. I feel like every story, like it's a different thing when you approach it, right? A story you can have the idea and you follow it through beginning to end and it works out perfectly. You get a story like that every once in a while where it's like it follows the plot you wanted and everything works out and all the threads come together, and then you'll get like a monstrosity of a story where it like morphs into something completely different. Or I've had stories that have started off contemporary and then all of a sudden I'm like, no, actually this is completely genre. I need to go back and rework things. So I think it just kind of it depends. I think it really just differs. I've had stories where I've sort of sat down and beginning to end finished it within like a week and sent it off to like my beta readers and got feedback and had it sort of finished and complete within like a month or so. Like those are the nice easy ones. And there's a couple that I've been working on for a few of my different anthology projects that I've been sort of plodding away at for like the last year or two. And those are the ones that, you know, you got to just keep kind of poking away at them until you get to the final product. So I think it really just, yeah, a lot of different things, length, genre, how it's going, if you're sticking to the plot you originally keep with it, or if it changes into something different. Yeah, I think it just really kind of depends on it, but there's a lot of variation, I would say.
Yeah, makes sense. So once we have this story written, Lauren, I'll start with you with this question. What are some of the different methods for publishing a short story, whether it's indie or traditional? You know, what's out there for, how do we get our short story out into the world once we have it done?
I think it kind of depends, which I feel like that's what I'm going to keep going down to. There's so much
Yeah, of course.
variation in terms of the short story market, because I think you can go a couple of different routes. I know for sort of the training that I got for short stories in my previous MFA program, a lot of it was really marketed towards like literary magazines, literary journals, and putting stories that were very like literary fiction focused in those spaces. So that was really how I started coming about it. I think that there are a lot of great journals and magazines out there that are publishing short fiction. And if that's sort of the route to go, I would say, like there's always calls for submission on social media. I found some different options on like Submittable, Duotrope, some of those bigger searcher like servers that you can look for submissions for. And then, as I think Chyina and Lara were attesting to, there's lots of different options with anthologies. You can self-publish. There's a lot of different avenues for that. But right now, I've been pretty entrenched in the anthology world for the past, I'd say, like 3-ish years. So that's pretty much where I've been really concentrating on short stories. And I think there are some fantastic anthologies that are coming out. I know Laura talked about one that I've been excited to take a look at when it's published. So there's some great work that anthologists are doing. I know that I sort of fell into the role, but it's exciting, and there's a lot of different things that are coming up with some new up and coming writers who are great short stories. Fantastic.
Nice. We'll go back Chyina and then Lara. So anything to add on terms of different methods of publishing short stories?
So yeah, I started out publishing in literary journals. I think they're a great way to kind of get your feet wet. Or if you're still, maybe if you're in college and your college has a literary journal, that's a great way too, because typically it's free, and a lot of literary journals you have to pay to submit to. You have to pay like an entry or reading fee or something like that. I am fully for Submittable. Submittable is a great place to look. You can also look at poetsandwriters.org and they do anthologies, poetry submissions, short fiction. Like you can find a lot there, and a lot of them are free. But I kind of stand with Lauren on this one. It really depends on what you want to do. Also, I feel like anthologies tend to be further spread, if that makes sense. Literary journals, you may know about it, and the people you share it with may know, but anthologies tend to get more publicity. So if you really want to share it, if you really want to want more people to know, an anthology is kind of a better way to go about it.
Nice. All right. And Lara?
Yeah, I would echo some of the same things that Lauren and Chyina were saying. I would also say, like, when I started, because I didn't know what I was doing, because I'm used to submitting to screenwriting contests. So I was already used to submitting stuff, and screenwriting contest submissions are way more expensive than lit mag fees, and a lot of them you can actually, like for literary magazines, a lot of them you can get for free. Some of them are like $3, but unless you're doing a contest, which is like $20, a lot of them would actually be for free. A lot of colleges, like, you don't have to be a college or a university student, but a lot of colleges put out their own literary magazine, and you could submit to that. I just would start Googling, like, where to publish short stories, or YA short story submissions, or whatever, because I've written in different genres and different things. Submittable, I would also echo, is a wonderful resource, but you kind of have to weed through a lot of the like junky stuff that's there. Like there's a lot of junk that's there, and then it's just not applicable to what people might be looking for. I think Duotrope also has some places to submit. I also think like for me, I have been published in an indie pub anthology also, which was Disabled Voices Anthology, and someone had reached out to me, and they were an editor in, not an editor, but they edited this anthology in Canada, but they knew me, and they said, hey, do you want to submit to this? So I think like being invited to submit to anthologies is another option, but I think it's more like you have to be already like networking and stuff with other writers and editors and people, and that's how you can get invited to submit to like anthologies. But just doing it cold for like submissions, I would just say Google, YA short story submissions, or literary, magazines, because there's a lot of literary fiction options. Voyage YA is great for YA short stories. There's a lot of different like YA ones. I had a friend reach out to me when I had posted that I had a short story acceptance recently, and he reached out to me on Instagram and he said, hey, where do you submit short stories? And I just found a bunch of links that said like 100 places to submit short story. Like you just kind of like Google and like find, and then you just kind of have to go through, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a couple hours to sit and submit your stories and stuff like that. But if you find things that are legit, some pay, some don't pay. And so it also depends on like what you're looking for and what the magazine or what the journal or whatever is looking for as well. So
Love it. Yeah, you guys are like ahead of me. I was wanting to ask, how do we find a place? And you guys are covering. Sounds like submittable, duotrope. I'm hearing that. What about contests? There's some different short story contests out there, right? You guys, what do you feel about contests? And leave that. Anyone want to jump in?
I'm all for contests, but kind of to mirror what was already said, you have to sift through the junk, because some are just like, you have to make sure that it's not like a scam, because a lot of people will try to be like, oh, you'll get like $500, and then but a winner is never announced, but you pay like $20 to like a $20 entry fee or something. So you'll see a lot of them on social media. You can find them submittable, Google. Like if you're in, I know some writers are in various organizations. Like if you're in an organization, sometimes your organization might have a contest. I typically like to kind of help me sift through all the junk and all the potential spam and scams. I use pw.org, and I try to like read through them and get, and typically I also do the research of, let me look up their website. Let me make sure this is a legitimate website. But it takes a lot to make sure that you can't just say, oh, I'm going to submit to a contest, because you never really know unless you do that work, if it's a legitimate contest or not.
Sure. Smart.
Yeah, just to echo Chyina, I think doing the research is the most important part. I know that there have been so many of my friends who have spent like hundreds of dollars a month, like entering contests and submitting, and I think it's hard for the short story poetry side of publishing, because so much of it is with smaller magazines and smaller journals who have very small staff and use those sort of like $20 reading fees to fund the journal itself. That maybe isn't the same beast that we're working with in regular traditional publishing or even indie publishing, where you don't necessarily need to submit a $25 fee to like submit a query for a novel, right? It's different. It's totally different experience. So I would say, especially if you're from a marginalized community or you are from a lower income background, like don't feel like you need to be consistently, $20 fee here, $25 fee here consistently. If that is something you want to do, I would recommend just like setting aside a budget per month of, I'm going to allot this specific amount, and that's what I'm going to use to submit for reading fees or for contests or stuff like that, because it can add up. I've had a couple of friends who haven't really given themselves like a the barrier for how much they're going to be submitting, and just kept going and kept going, and it can add up. So that would be my one piece of advice if you are going the route where you are submitting to these contests that charge the reading fees is pace yourself and just try to set a budget for yourself, because that's sort of how it tends to go with the journals and magazines and contest route.
Excellent. Well, that's a perfect segue. My next question for you, Lara. How much do you shop around a story? Do you you kind of have a place in mind and you're like, well, it didn't work there, and you just move on? Or do you kind of keep, shopping a story around until you find a home for it?
Oh, that's another good question. I was thinking about this in terms of I also write novellas. So I was thinking about this in terms of novellas too, because that's it's like a hard medium. You can't, traditional publishing doesn't always accept that either. So I was thinking, when you asked the question, I was just thinking about that in terms of both. But I think it can be really tough, because you don't know what, you don't necessarily always know what is a legitimate avenue. I mean, just a lot of Googling and a lot of reaching out to friends saying, hey, do you think does this sound like a scam? Or something. Because I think it's hard to know sometimes where to submit to, or what to look for. I've just kind of done it on my own. I remember when I first started submitting, I didn't even know that was really something you could do, because I've been writing short stories for years and writing fanfic for years, and I didn't know, even writing all this original short stories, I didn't know you could submit stuff. Even I had an editorial internship where I submitted a short story when I was doing this editorial internship at undergrad, and I didn't get published there, but that was, I think, my first experience submitting a short story 10, 11 years ago. I didn't even know that was an option to to be able to do. And I think now it's a lot more, there are a lot more options, and there are a lot more avenues to go with that. But there's also going to be more scams and more. So it's hard to know what to, I mean, you kind of just have to build a network of writer friends and people, and say, hey, where have you submitted, or what have you done? Another thing I've done, I don't know if this will help anybody, is because I follow a lot of author tubers, so authors who do videos on YouTube, and some of them do short fiction, or follow other short fiction writers and look to see where they've been published. Look in their bio to see where they've been published. And that's, I've done that too, and look, and look up those magazines and see if, or journals or whatever, and see if that would be a fit. Or if you're interested in a YA trad pub anthology, even if you don't have connections, start reading them, and say, hey, I've had people say, hey, do you want to try to put something together, even though it hasn't worked. You never know. But look and see where other people have been published in their bios, and start there. I think that would be a good place to start when reading the free short stories online. If you look in their bio and people have credits, that would definitely be a good place to start. So
Nice. Thank you. So Chyina, also, you shop around your short stories, or you kind of give it to one place and then be like, well, that was where I had in mind, and move on?
I very rarely, I won't say never, but I very rarely have a place in mind when I know that some people write for a specific publication, if, because Right Hive has their anthology. Let's say, oh, I really want to write I want to be in the Right Hive anthology, so let me look it up and look, and so they'll write a story specifically for that anthology. I have only done that twice. So I have to shop around if I want to be, want something published. So I'll look up, I'll Google, or I'll look up publications that I know of already that maybe I've never been published there, but I know someone or I've read their work before, and I like this publication. Let me see if my story fits. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, because literary journals, they change what they're looking for, with the seasons, and the same with some anthologies. If someone publishes an anthology regularly, maybe this anthology they want, horror. Maybe the next one they want romance. It depends. So you have to kind of shop around, and sometimes you find like something that's a perfect fit, and sometimes you're just like, this isn't really perfect, but I think I might be able to squeeze this in here somewhere. Let me just change this query a little bit to kind of force it in there. Which I've unashamedly done that multiple times. Usually it works. But if you are a writer who kind of just writes and then like, let me try and get this published, like me, you have to kind of shop around. Or, if you have a lot of editor friends or a lot of writer friends, maybe you can, compile your own anthology.
Yep. Yeah, I want to get to anthology in just a minute, but kind of following up on that just for a second, Chyina, like when you're shopping around, like we all have heard kind of the stories of these famous authors that we know that have their piles of rejections, right? Like has there one story that kind of sticks out that you've done where you're like, man, there were a whole bunch of no's before I got that yes on that one,
Yes. And it was short, but it wasn't fiction. So it was a short nonfiction piece that I wrote. And it really sucked. And I know a lot of writers who do really cool things with their rejections. Like I have a friend who she made a chair out of her, like she like paper mache a chair out of all the rejections. I am not that creative or that artistic, so I could not do that. But I thought this piece deserved to be out in the world, and no one else seemed to agree with me. Or they're like, oh, this would have fit for last year, or this would have fit. I'm like, well, can't you make it this year? So I think and sometimes we all get that kind of rejection like brain where like, should I rework this? So I tried not to rework it because I felt like it was perfect the way it was. So what I did instead was I just left it alone. I left it alone for a good while, and then I submitted it again, and I was able to present it at a conference, and then it got published. But I just sat on it, and sometimes you just have to sit on it. Like you might not need to change anything. You might just need to wait.
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. You gotta be at the right place at the right time with that whoever's publishing, right? Lauren, you've been shopping your works around too?
I'm kind of the opposite of China, actually. Most of the time I will have like snapshot ideas of short stories and I'll like save them, and I just save them for the perfect day, and then I tend to see the call for submission that pops up, and I know that there's like a few amazing ones that I'd seen that I've like saved from Twitter. There's one that was like a dark academia submission for an anthology, and that's like 6 or 7 months from now, and I was like, I had a story that's been percolating, so maybe I'll get a chance to hop on that. But I think that may be just because I'm very busy on the editorial side from my other position, so I feel like I was able to crank out a lot of more stories the way that I would have liked to when I was like in my MFA and working really on those creative works and just allowed to sort of let the juices flow there. But I think maybe I'm in the minority there. I think having the ability to sort of just write as you will and then shopping around is definitely the better way to go. I think it gives you a little bit more opportunity to find spots for your work in a really authentic way. But I tend to be the outlier with the sort of writing on writing for a specific call, I guess is what I should say. So yeah, opposite of China, but I would say China's way is definitely the way to go. If you're starting out for short stories, go with China's route, not with my route.
I have a question for you, Lauren, since you do
Yeah.
that route. Like if you if you go and you submit to that one special place, and let's say you sadly get a rejection, do you just keep it, or do you shop around then? What do you do then?
I just kind of hold on to it. I haven't I'm trying to think. I've had, I think, one or two of the stories that haven't made it in for subs, and those are ones that I've kind of just kept in the background and have just sort of like, okay, if I ever, end up submitting or end up publishing like a collection of short stories on my own, that's maybe something that I'll just keep for that collection, because I know obviously it'll like go along with the rest of the short stories that I've already published in terms of sort of like genre and theme and stuff like that. So, and then who knows, like maybe it'll just happen that I keep that story in a year or two down the line, another submission opens up for something that's sort of perfect. So I think but that's sort of, I have so many other projects and things going on. I feel like maybe if I did it, I would be shopping them around a lot more, but I'm pretty content to sort of just have them linger, hang out in my little cloud on my computer and wait for a while.
I'm kind of in your camp, Lauren, actually, where like when I've written some short stories, it's usually like I'll see like a prompt in some contest or something that is a legit contest, so that much is good. But like, I'll be like, oh, I got an idea for this, but then some of them, I got an honorable mention, that sort of thing. Some of them doesn't work out, and I'm okay. Let me see if I can find a different home for this. That's been my path. One thing I have done is be like, well, don't have a home for this. I'm gonna put it in my email newsletter. So share it that way, repurpose it that way, But
Yeah.
let's talk anthologies too, Lauren. I know you're in anthology world right now, right? So like how,
Yes.
if you're new, you're trying to kind of get started. I think a lot of writers look at like short stories as a way to kind of get started, which makes sense. Certainly it did before. I think it still makes sense now though. But how do you kind of, again, if you're new, how do you even find an anthology like opportunity, or is it all on you? Like, should a new writer start their own anthology? How do we do about that?
Uh, so I became an anthologist in a very strange roundabout sort of way, which was just sort of, I put out a tweet and I was like, I feel like there's a lot of gaps in terms of representation for short stories and anthologies out there. Like I'd love to read something like with genre fiction for specifically people of color. And I had a few presses reach out and they were like, are you putting something together? And I was like, I can. And just sort of started compiling things, and that sort of snowballed. And I now have about 5 or 6 anthologies under my belt at this point that I've collated as an anthologist, and a few others that are going along within the next few years that I'm planning to either co-edit or I'm in planning stages for. Most of them so far have been smaller presses or indie publishing, but a few I'm looking at in terms of traditional publishing. My agent is planning to actually take one out on sub, hopefully in the next couple months. So that's where I've been in right now. But it's a very time consuming job to be an anthologist. So I would say if you're just starting out, I would recommend doing the like shop around method, trying to look at being asked to be in an anthology rather than collating one yourself. It is a lot of work, because as an anthologist, you're really taking on all of the roles in terms of the editorial process, right? Like you're establishing the call for submissions, you are collating everybody, and then you end up being in charge of between, I normally say, like 13 to 20 different authors that you're trying to navigate deadlines for. And then you end up taking on developmental edits and copy edits and line edits and everything in terms of the whole editorial process. So it's a daunting process. It's very fulfilling. I really enjoy it. But I would say that if you're just starting out, I would not recommend going the anthologist route until you have published a few short stories and you sort of have learned the industry ins and outs a little bit more. But it's nice, but it's a lot of work.
Okay, so option A, make a tweet, have a bunch of people, and like just go for it. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
don't do that. Don't go that route.
Chyina, any thoughts on like other, kind of ways to kind of break into anthologies?
So if you have kind of like what Lauren was saying, if you have a lot of writer friends and a lot of editor friends, you might be lucky enough to someone might be writing an anthology, and there might be think, you know what, this person would be great for this anthology. Let me just go ahead and do that. Also looking out for calls. A lot of social media calls happen. Like they happen pretty regularly too. So if you keep an eye out for anthology calls for submissions, you can find a good amount of them. It's just, and then doing the research, because research is necessary with anything. But just to kind of give kudos to Lauren, like I worked on one anthology, and that wasn't even like everyone, it was an anthology, and everybody, all the authors were, it was classical fantasy. Everyone was dead, but it was a lot of work. So the fact that, maybe starting your own anthology, maybe wait until you're already settled in your writing career.
Seems sound advice. Yeah. All right. So look for Lauren on social media. All right, that's option 2. Like, all right, Lara.
I have a lot of calls, so.
I remember Lauren's. I've seen your calls for anthologies, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna submit something, and I never did, because I know you were like, at one point I saw like one call that was like looking for like Middle Eastern, like something with fairy tales, and I was like, because I should submit, and I never did, because I usually don't, like, the other, like from the other question before, was I usually don't write a story specifically for, sometimes I do, sometimes I have, and it hasn't worked out, but I usually just, write stories in general and see what fits. But I think for me, because I haven't done, like, I haven't been an anthologist, I can't speak to that, and that's a lot of work. But I think because I've done both I did an indie published, I was part of an indie published anthology and a traditionally published one. I think it's just a matter of like reaching out to people and like, either responding to submission calls like on Twitter or Instagram or, Google or something, or, reaching out to friends and saying, hey, do you know anyone who's, putting an anthology together? Do you know where I could be a part of something? Or sometimes other writers or writer editors will talk about, like what Chyina was saying about, they will talk about putting something together, and then someone will think of you and be like, oh, I know this person is interested in, being in an anthology or something like that. Or you could even reach out to someone, like for the traditionally published or indie published anthologies, if you're reading them, you could even reach out to some of the authors and be like, hey, I'm interested in being in an anthology at some point. Like, how did you get your opportunity to be in this anthology? And sometimes, the author's contact information will be available, and you could reach out to the authors directly and say, how are you a part of this? Or, if you see any other opportunities, if you know that person, can you think of me for that opportunity? Because a lot of mine were just kind of luck, but I had already been writing for a while. So I mean, just even doing something like this, going to a writers conference, or talking to other editors, other writers, because you never know. I had no idea that when the call for being ace went out, that it would actually even go, that we would even actually get like a deal. Or even with the indie pub anthology that I was in, like I had no idea that it would even, like when they were putting it all together, I was like, wow, is this really happening? Like, it's, to see it all come together is really cool, because it doesn't always happen. Because like I said earlier, I knew an author, and I submitted an idea to her, and that pitch became a story that's being published now, but it was originally for a different anthology, and that anthology just died on sub. They said it died on submission. There wasn't enough interest. But I remember the author emailing me and said, keep that story idea. You never know where you could use it, or just write it and then like submit it, somewhere else in the future. So I kept that idea. I didn't work on it for a while, and then I found that it would be useful for this, upcoming anthology, and it ended up working. So like, also keep your story ideas, if they're like little glimmers, keep your story ideas, because you never know what could be used for either an anthology or a short story submission. Even if they're not fully formed, keep your pitches, keep your ideas. Yeah.
I love that. I love it. Yeah. And I think such good advice that, networking, being part of a community, checking out Right Hive, right? All these are good things, to kind of find these anthology opportunities. And so let me kind of take this a step back. We've talked a little bit about like indie publishing and so I'm thinking indie publishing for an anthology is kind of same as like indie publishing for like a novel, right? Roughly? Okay. All right. Well, tell me, Lauren, how's it different?
It's interesting. I think you have a little bit. I'm definitely team indie for anthologies. I think the hands-on and smaller team works a little bit better. I have heard from friends who do traditional published anthologies, and it just seems like it's very difficult. I think when you're tracking down so many different authors. So far, everything that I've published has been indie publishing. And I think that with a smaller team, sometimes for the anthologies, it tends to be a little bit easier, especially when you're working on multiple different deadlines and multiple authors and you're all over the place with different things. So in that aspect, I think maybe there's a little bit of an advantage. And maybe it's a little bit different with novels right now. I mean, obviously, my role as an acquisitions editor, I'm working one-on-one with an author. I haven't dived into any of the Right Hive anthologies, for example, that are published through Inked and Gray Press, where I'm working. And so in that aspect, I haven't had a chance to sort of see how that works on that end. But yeah, I feel like there's just such a difference with short story / anthologies versus some of the larger novel spaces. But I think for indies and smaller presses, it tends to be a little bit more hands-on in a way that works really, really well for managing multiple authors and multiple stories and deadlines.
Okay, fair. So what other like indie options are out there for short story if you're wanting to publish your own short story? You can find kind of these small anthologies, right? And obviously we talked about kind of different like, well, to me the journals are more like traditional, So what are indie options are out there? Anything? Or is there not that much?
I I think it's interesting because I feel like for short stories, I don't know. I feel like I'm like trying to like wrap my head around the question because I don't think I ever really thought about that because I think for traditional publishing, when you're thinking about novels, there's like a very specific divide between indie publishing and traditional publishing. And I don't know if the divide is as clear cut for short stories. Because in my head, I don't even think that I've really thought about sort of like literary magazines being the traditional publishing route for that. So I don't really know if there would necessarily be like an indie equivalent for
Yeah,
short stories, besides like
I
maybe like a
agree.
blog or something.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. There, I think when you think of traditional for short stories, you're thinking more of like those big names. But like if I mean there are really amazing, small presses, small magazines that maybe you only have like 4 people working for the magazine, but the work they put out is amazing.
Mhm.
And it's not really it's not a big name. It's not like some Writer's Digest or but it's still great quality. So I don't think it's maybe it's not the traditional household name, but I don't know if there's a clear line. I don't even think there is a line really with short stories, which kind of, I guess, gives you more freedom to kind of experiment, to see which avenue works for you, because some people might like writing for magazines or journals better than they like writing for anthologies. Some people might like anthologies more than literary magazines or journals. It really just depends.
Fair, makes sense. Lara, let me kind of reframe a little bit. You mentioned like reading some stuff like online, being able to read like short stories online for free. Where are you finding these? What places online are good for like high quality short stories, but also free?
I've seen like Fractured Lit has microfiction and flash fiction. A lot of the places like or some of the places that I've been published, like you can read it for free, like Drunk Monkeys has, like a free, like it's free. You kind of just have to Google like, flash fiction online is an actual thing. but you kind of just Google it and you kind of see, you know, where can I read flash fiction or short stories online. And I think it's helpful that there are, you know, short stories and flash fiction, you know, available to read. I don't like that things are behind, you know, paywalls, or that you have to buy the magazine in order to read it. I think that's kind of frustrating. I mean, I support that you would have to buy something to support but I also think like there should be like a free option too, because not everyone can, you know, afford that. But I think because, you know, we're all trying to like learn like the form, that it's easier if it's just available online so like anyone can read. And plus it would draw more traffic. It draws more traffic to the site, to just like I could send like, hey, my story just got published here, you can read it, you know, so it draws more traffic to the site. I just got published in Hairstreak Butterfly Review. I think it's issue 5. So like that's available online for free, but some of them you have to buy the issue in order to read it. And I think there should be both options available. There should be a free option, and like if you want to pay, because then like it's just more barriers, and especially for like marginalized, any kind of marginalized, you know, group. And sometimes you're lucky to find you know, some short story, like when you submit and you get accepted, some of them do pay. So sometimes you're lucky to get paid, but I think that also like depends. Like if you're submitting to like a very, very like high like a really competitive like fantasy or sci-fi, you know, magazine, like there are some big ones out there, Clark's World and stuff, like really, really big name, you know, they don't take a lot of submissions. But you know, if you look at like some of the other smaller ones, they might take, you know, some more. But I think some of it is just luck. I mean, a lot of it is luck, but I don't like the whole you have to pay to read some. Unless you're like buying, like unless it's a different kind of anthology, like if it is specifically indie published or traditional publishing, okay, then I could kind of understand. But if you're reading, you know, stuff for free online, I think it should be more. There should be more options.
Yeah, well, I'm all about reading more stories. Yeah. So, well, thank you all. It's been a great conversation. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. I feel like I've learned some things. Lara, is there anything you'd like to kind of wrap up with, and where can people find you online so that they can check out your stories?
Oh gosh. So I don't have a website yet. I need one. I don't have really one. I do kind of have a blog, but I don't really use it. But I'm just at True Cherry Girl. I do keep it locked, but people can follow me. It's TRU Cherry Girl. And I do kind of like, if you Google me too, you could find like my short stories. Like if you just Google my name, if you Google Lara Ameen, or if you Google Lara Ameen writer, you could find my novel excerpt, my short stories. It'll just come up in the listing.
There you
And
go.
yeah,
That True Cherry, is that on Twitter or
Twitter and Instagram.
Twitter and Instagram? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Lauren, any parting pearls of wisdom or words of encouragement? Where can folks find you and follow you online?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter for as long as it is still semi up and running. And so for there, I'm Lauren Gilmore 03, but you can find like all of my work, any information regarding editing that I do, or my role as an acquisitions editor, and sort of what Inked and Gray is acquiring at my website, laurentdavila.com. And so all of that has links to everything that I've had published so far, including all of my anthologies and information for orders there, and some new ones that'll be released in the next year or two. So if you're interested in some of the other genre work that I'm doing, that's where you can find me.
Wonderful. And Chyina, I think you have some special news as well that you'd like to share.
Yeah, so first off, you can just like, I'm very Googleable. Like I'm the only Chyina Powell in existence as of today. So you can just put my name into Google and you'll find me, but I'm also at Chyina Powell on everything, because I am horrible at remembering, usernames. I just made it really simple. You can go to my website, powelleditorial.org, and find all my links there. But also, I run a nonprofit, and so the Women of Color Writers Circle, and we are giving away 3,000 books this summer. So the goal of these books is we want them to be I'm a sensitivity reader, and so we want these books to be representative. So the books we are giving away are going to be not just books about people of color, about people with disabilities, about people with body differences or different body sizes, but we want them to be written by people of those communities, because that's how you get it right, So if you'd like to find out more information about that, or if you'd like to support or share, you can also go to my website. You can go to, you can find the Circle on Twitter or on Instagram at WOC Writer Circle. You can, find out more about that. And we hope to this is our first year doing it, but we hope to make it a annual thing where we give out books so that kids can see people who look like them, written by people who look like them, who identify like they identify. So.
Well, that's super cool about the book giveaway, Chyina. I'm like really excited about that. Also, the reason why I'm very particular about being Nicholas W. Fuller is because that way I'm the only Nicholas W. Fuller online. So I feel you, Chyina. Like I got the same thing going on. Anyway, again, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for making it. Thanks for bearing with me, moderating with you. If you'd like to follow me, dear viewer, you can at youtube.com/@NicholasWFuller or my website, nicholaswfuller.com. I'm working on a cozy sci-fi adventure novel, and I've been writing short stories over the last year, so you can check some of that stuff out. Thanks again, each of you as panelists. Thanks to Right Hive staff for putting this on and putting it all together and letting us all be a part of this and making my job as moderator really easy. And thank you for watching. Have a great day.